Where do you live?
Everywhere. I am an itinerant evangelist, so I have no home. No, everything my wife and I own fits in our hiking backpacks, and we just go from place to place, teaching people, staying in their homes or different things like that. I'm going to share with you what I myself personally have learned from the message. But as to whether it is the message or not, you're not going to know unless you go and study Jones and Waggoner for yourselves. I hear many different people saying, oh, this teacher, that preacher, they're preaching righteousness by faith. And I ask these people, how do you know? They say, oh, because they say they are. Or I think they are. I say, well, have you ever read the books by Jones and Waggoner? No. Well, how do you know they're teaching righteousness by faith? Good question?
Yes.
If we don't know the message for ourselves, we're not going to know if somebody else is actually teaching it or not. We might think they are, when really they might be teaching part of it or something like that. So, as I said, I can share with you what I have learned, but go and study it for yourself. Be like the Bereans, go and see whether these things be true or not. Apparently there's some books there with my name on them. I never recommend my material. I give seminars. I never say, oh, I have a book or anything like that. Well, it's on the front page because other people recommend it and they want it downloadable from my website. But I myself, no. All I can do is share with you my experience. That's all.
Praise the Lord.
I don't claim to be teaching doctrine. I don't claim to be teaching anything. Everything I share is just my own personal testimony in the Word of God. Some things you may agree with, some things you may not agree with. The things you disagree with, well, we learned last night that if we're a true Christian, we're going to go to God and say, hey God, you know, is this right or is this not? But personally, I do believe that you're going to appreciate very much what we're looking at. Like I said last night, I don't teach doctrine. I try to teach the message as it relates to our own personal experience, trying to survive in this world today. I don't talk about tomorrow, because tomorrow doesn't help us. There are many people that talk about the time of trouble and we're going to be tested on every point and we're going to vindicate God and all of that. To me, that takes the focus away from the cross and it takes the focus away from our needs for today. And Christ must be relevant to us in our experience today. A gospel that does not teach a present help in Jesus Christ is not good news. Amen. First one I want to do is look at the promises that God made to Abraham. And many people think that, it's just a promise of he's going to inherit the land and then eventually Jesus Christ will be born. No. The promises that God made to Abraham actually come under the heading of the everlasting covenant. Exactly the same promises that God made to Abraham, He made to Adam and Eve, He made to Noah, and He makes to us today. Many people think there is an Old Testament dispensation and a New Testament dispensation. and that there are different systems of salvation under the old and under the new. But no, we're going to see very clearly that the same gospel that we are hearing today was preached to those before the days of Christ as well.
All of it leads to Jesus.
All of it leads to Jesus, exactly. So let's look at these promises made to Abraham. Let's first read his call, and for the sake of saving my voice today, because we do have a number of sessions, can I have someone who would volunteer to read all the references for this session? And we'll get a different volunteer every session. Can we have one volunteer willing to read the references and scriptures for this session?
I'll do it.
You will? You're closer? All right. Thank you very much. Okay, let's read the story of Abraham's call out of Haran.
Genesis 12, 1 through 5. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came.
Thank you. So they went out of Haran, and he came into the land of Canaan. And then, as we read the story, there was a drought.
Genesis 12:10. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land.
Now this is actually a very important part of the story. I'm not going to expand on it with scriptures. But as you know, he told a lie about his wife and said she was his sister. And because of that, Pharaoh treated him very nicely. And he gave him flocks and herds and maids and servants and everything. Now you remember the story of Hagar. And we often look at that story and we think, wow, Sarah really had no faith. She was the problem, we think. And we think, well, she was the one who came up with this great idea and led Abraham into that sin. But if you actually read the story there, Hagar was given by Pharaoh to Abraham. Now, if he had not had that lack of faith himself on that first occasion, it would not have opened the door for that failing later. So we might be tempted to think that it was the woman's fault. No, it was actually the man's fault. Just a little side note of interest for you. Let's continue the story, please.
Genesis 13, 5 through 7. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together. For their substance was great, so they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land.
Continue.
Genesis 13, 8 through 11. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen. For we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou wilt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other.
Now I want us to notice something here. This was when we read before. God said to him, "Get thee out of thy country, out from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." Notice that at this point where this strife is taking place, he went into the land and he went into Egypt, he came back, there's all this, then there's this strife. At this time, God has not actually shown him the land that he would inherit. Now notice here that as soon as Lot separates from him, God fulfills his promise.
Genesis 13:14 through 17. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee.
God's promises are conditional. He said, "Get out from your father's house, and I will show you the land." We think it was a terrible, terrible thing that they had this strife and Lot had to leave. But it was actually necessary. Because whilst Abraham had not fully complied with those conditions, God could not fulfill his promise. Now it's very interesting because he said to Lot, he said, if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. He was not concerned as to which direction Lot went. Now this is very interesting because God had said, come into this land, I'm going to show you, I'm going to give it to you. And yet Lot goes that way, and Abraham, he's like, no problem, I'll go this way. And then God said to him, you look north, south, west, and even to the direction where Lot has gone, all of that I will give to you. Now this is something that we need to understand, because today many of the Christian religions are very supportive of the nation of Israel. They have interpreted this promise to Abraham, and they have concluded that God gave that land of Israel to them, and the Zionist idea is that Christ cannot come until they are in possession of the land. The Jewish Orthodox, which goes back for millennia, they've always believed that they cannot possess their promised land until the Messiah comes. Whereas Zionism, which only started about 130, 140 years ago, says they have to possess the land. Then the Messiah will come. And so the Jews, or shall I say the Zionists, have a lot of support from the Christian denominations who have interpreted the scriptures that Israel will be gathered again. They will have their nation, and then will come this great millennia. And so they are not only becoming politically involved, but we're going to see very soon that they will become militarily involved as well. Simply because the promise to Abraham was not understood. Now we want to understand how Abraham understood his promise. Now God said, come into this land, I'm going to give you this land. But when he went into Canaan, he didn't care which direction Lot went. As in, was this really the promised land, the land that God promised him, or not? Notice an experience here with his son Isaac.
Genesis 26, 1 through 4. And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I spare unto Abraham thy father, but which I swore unto Abraham thy father, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed.
So the same promise is made to Isaac. I will give to you all of these countries, all around where you are, they're all yours. But see his attitude.
Genesis 26:19 through 22. And Isaac's servants digging in the valley, and found there a well of springing water. And the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, The water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. And they digging another well, and strove for that also. And he called the name of it Shitnah. And he removed from thence, and digging another well. And for that they strove not. And he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land.
This is an interesting attitude. Mm-hmm. Because God has just said to him, here, everything is yours. And yet, after he digs a well, along come these other people, and they drive him away. He's like, okay, no problems, I'm not going to fight for it. He goes, digs another well. They drive him away. Okay, no contest, no problem. And then finally, they let him keep his well, and he says, the Lord hath done what?
Made room for us.
Made room for us. One thing becomes very clear. He did not regard any of this as his possession. None. None of it whatsoever. He's like, wow, if the Lord is going to be so mercy as to give me my own little piece of land in this place, praise the Lord. Now, same promise was made to Jacob.
Genesis 28:12 through 14. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereupon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
So the same promise is made to Jacob. But did you notice each occasion the promise is expanded? So when the promise was made to Abraham, God delineated a particular area between rivers and things like that. Then when it came to the promise to Isaac, it was all of these countries will be yours. Now, thou shalt spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. And he makes no mention of limitation. None whatsoever. How far is the east and the west?
Forever.
It's forever. And so we begin to get a bigger picture and come to understand that the land that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were in was not the promised land. Now, here's a quotation, the words of King David.
Actually, at the end of that, if we go back one slide, there's something that's very different there too. At the last phrase. Mm-hmm. And through thy seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That's the first mention of why they were given the land too, I think, isn't it? That was
well, the same promise was made to Abraham, that through his seed
the whole world,
the whole world would be blessed. Yeah, there's different aspects to these promises. But this time we're going to pick out 8 aspects. Of course, Christ was part of the promise. But we're not going to look at that this time. Now, David, at the height of the Israelite empire, notice what he said here in 1 Chronicles 29:15.
For we are strangers before thee, and sojourners, as were all our fathers. Our days on the earth are as a shadow, and there is none abiding.
We are strangers and sojourners. Even he did not consider this world was his home. Even that vast empire at that time, he did not consider it as the promised land either. Because God had said, this will be your possession to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and their seed. And here he is, David, many years later, we're just strangers and pilgrims in this land. We have no abiding place here. Now, what was the promise that God made to Abraham? What did he really promise him?
Romans 4:13, for the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith.
That he should be the heir of what?
The world.
The world. So he's like, you can go whichever way you want, Lot. No problem. That's your prerogative. I'm waiting for something better. Isaac, the same thing. Okay, that's fine. You can have the world. I'll just move on. This world is not my home. I'm waiting for a new world, a new home. What was the promise? First promise was the new earth. This is what the promise was. And unfortunately, because many of the Christian denominations do not understand this today, they are fighting for something that was never part of the promise. And if God did not promise it, He's not going to support it. It's going to end up very bad. So let's look at another part of the promise that was made to Abraham. Hebrews 11:12-16, speaking of the children of Abraham.
Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many of the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city.
So all the children of Abraham had the same expectation that Abraham had. And it was not a little promised land as we see it today. It was an earth made new, a heavenly country. And a what? What else? A city. And so the promise also included the heavenly city. As we understand from the book of Revelation, when God makes everything new again, that heavenly city comes down to this earth. Let's see what else was promised to Abraham.
Genesis 13:14-17. And the Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever.
He will give it to his seed and to him. But what happened? Let's read how Stephen describes this.
Acts 7:4-5. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Charan. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land, wherein ye now dwell, and he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on it. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, yet when as yet he had no child.
Now that's a lot of detail there, isn't there? Mm-hmm. He came into this very land, and here is Stephen speaking to the Jews in their land of Israel, and he says God gave him no inheritance in that land. Mm-hmm. That was not the promise. In fact, he did not even put his foot on the inheritance, because that inheritance was an earth fully renewed by the power of God. An earth made new, cleansed, purified of sin. Now the interesting thing is, he would give it to him for a possession. What happened to him? He died. And so what else did the promise include? The resurrection. Exactly. So let's see what else we can find in these promises that were made to Abraham.
Genesis 17, 7 and 8. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
What kind of possession?
Everlasting.
Everlasting possession. Now, how can you enjoy an everlasting possession unless you have a particular kind of life?
Everlasting.
Everlasting life. And so the promises that were made to Abraham included the promise of an eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's see what else was promised to Abraham.
Matthew 25:46. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal.
Who is it that received that everlasting life?
The righteous.
Yeah, you have to have a particular condition of character. And so the promise to Abraham, because it was promised that he would have the land forever, which means he would live forever, but you can only live together if you're righteous. Therefore, the promise to Abraham included a righteous life.
Yeah.
Now let's see what else was promised to Abraham. And remember, all these promises are for us also.
1 Peter 1:3-4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again into a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you.
Now that inheritance, that incorruptible eternal inheritance, we are begotten to the hope of it by what?
The resurrection.
And so that inheritance cannot be received except through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And so the promise to Abraham included the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because if God is going to give that, it only comes through that. Isn't this interesting? Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. Let's see what else was promised.
Matthew 25:31-34. That's in Spanish.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world.
Ah, come, he says, inherit that everlasting kingdom that has been prepared for you. When? When the Son of Man shall come in his glory. So that inheritance could not be received until after Christ comes in his glory. Therefore, the promise to Abraham included the coming of Christ. Let's see what else we can find. Matthew 24:14.
And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
And then shall the end come. And so what else was included?
The end time.
And the preaching of the gospel to the whole world. All of these things are contained in those promises that were made to Abraham. So often we think, like I said before, the promises that were made to Abraham are not relevant to us. Oh yes, they are. Extremely relevant to us, because they're exactly the same promises that were made to him have been made to us. Now, let's see if we can discover what time God wanted to fulfill his promise. Now this might make you think a little bit outside the box that you're used to thinking in. But as I said before, go home, study it, ask God. But let's see what we can learn.
Genesis 15:13 through 16. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
Who can tell me when the period of the 400 years would commence?
When Israel left Egypt.
When Israel left Egypt?
When he went into Egypt.
Oh, yes.
From the flood and from the famine in Israel.
I encourage you to sit down and do some calculations. Calculate ages and dates and things like that. You'll be very surprised. In fact, you'll actually learn that Jacob was about 100 years of age when he wrestled with the angel. And he was actually about 80 years of age when he was actually 87 when he married Leah and Rachel. That's pretty old. And then you also learn that, because I, growing up, had the picture that when Joseph was 17 and sold into slavery, I always thought his brothers were in their 40s. No. The oldest brother would have been 22, 23, not older than that. And remember, they had that experience in that city where Simeon and Levi killed all the males after they circumcised themselves.
Yeah.
And Joseph had been sent by his father to find his brothers, and they were in that exact area of that city. And then they weren't there, so they moved on. So by the time Joseph found his brothers, they were not sitting around a campfire strumming their guitar singing hymns. Oh no. They were practicing their sword fighting. They were practicing their archery. These were skilled men. When you read the description of Jacob when he was out taking care of the flocks, you realize he had to fight off the marauders, not just the animals, but marauders. And in those days, the sheep and the cows was currency. They didn't have money. They didn't trade with gold. They traded with sheep and cows. And so it was very common in his day for thieves and large marauding parties to come and steal other people's sheep or cows. So this man, Jacob, he was a strong man. He was a fighter. and his children had been out there with him, growing up with him, and they had learned how to fight. I mean, Simeon and Levi wiped out all the men of an entire city. These were not soft, inexperienced people. So there they were by the time Joseph finds them, and they are just full of their own selves because they've been reminiscing of their great power and might in what they accomplished there in that city. Plus 22, 23 years of age, very immature. And they showed their immaturity in their attitude toward Joseph. So I actually do highly recommend that you sit down one day and calculate times and ages and things like that, because it's really fascinating. It actually explains a lot of stories in the Bible. Now the 400 years, notice says they shall afflict them 400 years. When you calculate that, you find the affliction actually began on the day that Ishmael mocked Isaac as a little child. From that period on until the day they left Egypt is a 400-year period. The Bible also speaks of a 430-year period. And that time period commences when Abraham left Haran. And if you calculate that time there, you will find exactly. He was 70. How old was he when he left Haran?
75.
75? I'm a little rusty. I need to recalculate things. But that's exactly how the pioneers calculated things as well. So they would be afflicted 400 years, and then in that fourth generation they would come back to that area. Now let's see how Stephen describes this.
Acts 7, 5 through 7. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on it. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for possession, and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, and that they should bring them into bondage, and entreat them evil 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, and said God, and after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place.
So in that fourth generation, they would come out of Egypt and they would serve God in that place. They would serve God. What kind of a service did Stephen understand God was promising? Let's read the Song of Moses after they came through the Red Sea.
Exodus 15, 13 through 17. Thou in thy mercy hast led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, shall take hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm they shall be as still as stone, till thy people pass over. O Lord, till the people pass over, which thou hast purchased. Thou shalt bring them in, and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established.
Fourth generation. He would bring them into the mountain of whose inheritance?
God's.
Is this earth as it is God's inheritance, or is it the new earth? In the place, O Lord, which who has made for thee to dwell in? Which sanctuary? Hebrews 9, 11 and 24.
But Christ, being come, and high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us.
Now that fourth generation, God promised to Abraham that fourth generation would serve God in His sanctuary. The sanctuary that He Himself made. That's very interesting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Now, let's read of when the Israelites came to Mount Sinai. God made a very particular promise to these people. Now notice what this promise was.
Exodus 19, 5 and 6. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel.
They would be a kingdom of priests. Mm-hmm. They would serve Him in His sanctuary. Now we saw the list of all of these promises that were made to Abraham. The earth made new, that heavenly city coming down to this earth. Mm-hmm. God wanted to fulfill that to them in the fourth generation.
No wonder Mrs. White says, don't just read your Bible. You dig for it.
You have to dig for it. Exactly. And if you study Waggoner's book, The Everlasting Covenant, he expounds on these things with so much detail. In fact, he will even show you, because the question comes into your mind, but what about Calvary? What about the second coming of Christ? Well, that's all God's prerogative. But Waggoner actually identifies that there are a lot of similarities between Calvary, the second coming of Christ, and the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. Everything's according to the faith of the individuals. Now, there was one thing that needed to happen, as we read, and that was that the gospel had to be proclaimed in the whole world before everything else could be fulfilled. So could this happen in that fourth generation? Let's see. Matthew 24:14 we read before.
And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
So that nothing could happen in those promises until that gospel was proclaimed. Romans 1:16.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek.
What is the gospel? The power of God. The end could not come until the power of God is proclaimed in all the world. And when that would happen, the end would come. Now, I'm sorry, there's Spanish again in that reference.
Exodus.
I have converted my slides from Spanish to English. It is Exodus, yes. Now, here is God speaking of Pharaoh. Now, notice what he says to Pharaoh.
Exodus 9:16. And in every deed, for this cause have I raised thee up, for to show in thee my power, and that my name shall be declared throughout all the earth.
What would happen through that experience there with Egypt?
His power.
His power, the power of God, His name, His power, His character, it's all synonymous, would be proclaimed through the whole earth. Now remember, He said, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests. What is the work of a priest?
Malachi 2:4-7. And ye shall know that I have sent this commandment unto you, that my covenant might be with Levi, saith the Lord of hosts. My covenant was with him of life and peace, and I gave them to him for the fear wherewith he feared me, and was afraid before my name. The law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and did not turn many away from iniquity. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts.
So what is the work of a priest?
He's a messenger.
He's a messenger of, he's a teacher of what?
Knowledge of God.
The knowledge of God, the law of God. It's all synonymous. The law, the power, the character. The law, as we're told, is a transcript of God's character. It's all part of the same thing, the power and everything. And he would have made them a kingdom of priests. In other words, teachers and proclaimers of that gospel, that power of God unto salvation. And through that experience of the plagues in Egypt, the name of God would have been proclaimed through the whole world. Now when they came to the city of Jericho, notice what Rahab said.
Joshua 2, 9 through 7. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, when ye came out of Egypt, and that ye did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man, because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above, and in the earth beneath.
The Lord your God, he is what?
God.
This was 40 years later. The world was absolutely terrified of the Israelites, because they had seen how God had delivered them from Egypt. He had brought through the Red Sea, what he did to the Amorites, all of that. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man. They all had a sense of need at that time. He is God, but how do I serve him? How do I worship him? And God at Sinai wanted them to accept his promise to make them a kingdom of priests, teachers, proclaimers of the gospel. And at that time, the world was ripe to hear it and choose life or choose death. Remember, the iniquity of the Amorites was not full 400 years earlier, but now 400 years later, the probation of the world was at the point where it could close. And unfortunately, they failed. Now what are we to be today?
1 Peter 1, 9. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light.
So this is the work of the priesthood. This is what these Israelites should have done. They should have gone into all the world. And you know, they could have done that. They would have gone into the land of Canaan, and the people would have just run. And they could have walked right into the people's homes. They could have left their women and children there. Nobody would dare to touch them. And 2 by 2, they could have gone out, evangelized the world. And very quickly, the end would have come. Same opportunity we have today, they had in their generation, that 4th generation. And if you study your Bible carefully, you will find many generations previous to our generation had opportunities. Not only 1888, not only those in 1844, Many, many other opportunities. What was the problem? What is our problem today?
Hebrews 3:17 and 19. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom swear he that they shall not enter into his rest, but to them that believeth not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief.
Because of what?
Unbelief.
Unbelief.
Hebrews 4:1. Let us therefore fear lest, a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it.
Now it's our turn. How can we miss out? By unbelief. But unbelief of what? What is it that today we fail to believe? That's the question. What is it that we have not yet got right in our understanding so that we can actually apply ourselves and our faith to it?
His righteousness in our lives.
His righteousness in our lives, but
Salvation.
sometimes answers are just cliches. His righteousness in our lives, but really what is that? His character. But how do we have his character? And we're going to look at these things. We're going to go step by step by step, looking at this plan of salvation that God has made for us. But the problem with the Israelites was they didn't believe it. That was the problem. And I would say we might be tempted to say we don't either, but the problem we have today, we haven't heard it. And so we don't know what to believe in. The whole world was looking for answers at that time. And God was wanting a people to go out there and give them the answers. They were looking for something to believe in. But where were his messengers? Makes me think of September 11, 2001. Did you see, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, all the newspaper articles, all the comments and all the forums, where is God? Who is God? But did you see, before a month was up, people hardened their hearts. And they're like, well, forget it. God has not answered. And since September 11, 2001, many people that were searching for God back then, not having found him, have now hardened their hearts against him. Because we were not ready to give them answers. All through history, when a crisis has taken place in this world, that is our opportunity to work. But we've missed opportunity after opportunity, and millions of people are going to the grave without answers. God is love, and he's there, and he's trying to communicate to these people, I love you, but he has put himself within the law. He's made it himself. It's his choice of having to work through humanity. And so many people are passing away, not having the answers they need. So next time there's a major crisis that takes place in your country or in this world, that's the time to work. But you have to prepare yourself. You have to get to know the message, and you have to get to know God personally. So in our next study, we're going to look at what the mistake they really made was. We're going to commence with the fundamentals. But now we will have a prayer. And my apologies, I took up a little bit of break time, so we'll have a 20-minute break, and then we'll come back.